Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Benjamin Potts Wash Processed Honduras from Fuglen Coffee Roasters. And there's the container right there. And Fuglen, based out of Oslo, Norway. And this is part 21 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series, and our second coffee from Fuglen in the Advent Calendar. And this, of course, makes back-to-back Fuglen reviews, as yesterday we reviewed their honey-processed Ethiopian coffee. Two somewhat mixed reviews, as I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of the roast profile. However, I did enjoy the flavor profile of that coffee, so I'm curious to see how this coffee turns out. And again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with a Chemex, and I was able to find a brew guide on Fuglen's website, which translated to a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in terms of roast profile for this coffee, as I mentioned in yesterday's review, they are definitely on the more developed side of coffee roasters, especially relative to the other ones in this Advent calendar. And this coffee is no exception, as this one actually felt a little bit more developed than even yesterday's coffee. And I think a lot of people would align this a little bit more close with a medium than even a light medium by most standards and metrics. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. And first impression, and one thing I was able to pick up just from opening the container itself and brewing the coffee, was I knew that there was a little bit more development in this cup, and definitely reigned true when trying the coffee for the first time. I was a little bit more full-bodied and bold. In addition to that, it does lean heavily into the strong chocolate-based characteristics of the cup, with this somewhat complementary nuttiness and earthy aspect to the coffee itself. Now, oftentimes I say when it comes to more developed coffees, the best thing and attribute I get from them is this somewhat caramelized and candied aspect within the coffee. And that was definitely no exception in this one right here, as the caramel does maintain a strong presence throughout the time drinking this coffee. And if anything, it gives the nutty components as well as the fruit characteristics this slight candied sense to them. That was by far my favorite part of this coffee, as it definitely did kind of contrast the more robust and bold characteristics within the coffee. There are additional components as well, as it does remain moderately bright right at the forefront, and it does maintain that brightness throughout, except for in the finish when it really does seem to accentuate a lot of the more smoky and roasty qualities that definitely very much sit on the palate. Now, there wasn't too much of a difference with the Chemex, as you would imagine. There was a lighter body, and if anything, I would say that it accentuated some of the more candied characteristics to it, the kind of caramel characteristics to the coffee. It just toned down what was a little bit more of a bold coffee to a somewhat more tame version of that same coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and we have a bunch of level 4s, so we will start with the body at a level 4. Yes, this one probably has the most body of any coffee in the Advent calendar up to this point. A little thinner bodied through the Chemex as opposed to the V60, that's to be expected, so not too much to say on that. Very full-bodied cup of coffee. Finish, level 4, yes, and this is actually on the higher side of level 4, and it's not necessarily my favorite finish, as it definitely does have this smoky quality to it, and I have to say, in addition to that, it does sometimes come off slightly metallic as well, so really didn't enjoy the finish in this coffee. If anything, I feel like it kind of countered some of the other aspects in this coffee that I did like. Then we have the chocolate at a level 4, and that's another thing I mentioned, was that was right there at the forefront, one of the most dominant characteristics to it. Very much supplied the base of this coffee, and it was a little bit more of a dark chocolate aspect to it as well, so definitely agree with that. Caramel, level 4, yes, and that is the caramel in itself, but if anything, I would say that this had a more caramelized, more candied aspect to it, as opposed to a straight kind of brown candy flavor profile to the cup. So caramel, level 4, but a slightly different caramel in that sense. Smokiness, level 4. That's probably the biggest deal of this coffee. As I mentioned, this one felt like it had a fair bit of development to it, so I was definitely pulling out a lot of these smoky, roasty qualities within the cup itself. Now, a bunch of level 3s as well. We'll start with the bitterness, and I think that's kind of attributed to the more dark chocolate characteristics within the cup, so that's why it's up there. Also, the kind of bitterness that you can get from coffee in general. It does have that kind of coffee bitterness to the cup. Savoriness, level 3. I mentioned that there's a little bit of earthiness within the cup itself too, so I definitely see a fair bit of that in this cup. Cleanliness, level 3. Truth be told, it is on the lower side of that level 3, and I think that's because it's kind of muddied by a lot of the, I want to say that slight metallic component I was getting from it, the slight earthy component I was getting. So it didn't necessarily provide a super clean, straightforward cup. Also, the roasty qualities did kind of play a factor in that rating. Sweetness, level 3. Yes, it has good sweetness to it, and that's kind of that candied sweetness. I would say that it didn't quite justify reaching that level 4 mark, but one of the better qualities in this coffee was the sweetness that I was able to pull out from underneath the more robust characteristics. Acidity level 3. As I mentioned, there was a kind of unique, interesting brightness within this coffee, and it's probably on the lower side of level 3. I felt that since there was enough brightness to at least score it that high, then I didn't want to put it all the way down there at that level 2 because it was noticeable enough to be scored at that mark. Spice and salty, those are two things also at the level 3, and that again kind of goes with the earthy and the nutty components within this coffee. And then the one fruit characteristic that reached that level 3 mark was the citrus, and they have a pear listed on here, and I always don't know where to put the apple or pear in terms of this tasting wheel, but I would say it was most closely aligned with the citrus. And if anything, whatever the fruit component in this coffee was, it was a slight candied citrus, but not quite a like lemon-like or a super tart sort of citric fruit, but rather something a little bit more neutral. So I like the way that this tasting wheel looks, for the exception of the body for the Chemex as well. I would say pretty similar through both brew methods on the tasting wheel. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan, and I don't think that's surprising given that I didn't enjoy yesterday's coffee because of the same reasons I didn't enjoy this one. The roast profile in it was just not necessarily my type of coffee. But I do want to give credit to Fuglen because I don't think that I'm really set up to drink coffees like this in general. I feel like I don't have the right water for this. I really should have made some adjustments to the water beforehand, and I probably would make some significant adjustments within the coffee itself if I did have a lot of time to work on this one specifically. That's what I did with the one Fuglen review that I feel like we're going to essentially scrap at this moment. I had a lot of adjustments I made to bring out the best in that coffee. And ironically, that tasting wheel looks very similar to this tasting wheel as well, with a couple of differences that I was able to improve the coffee with, having a little bit more time to work on it and having some more cups to work on it. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though, it's kind of in the same vein as yesterday's coffee. This one just feels a little bit more developed. So if you like the more full-bodied cups of coffee with those very strong kind of chocolate characteristics, the candied caramelized characteristics to the cup, I feel like this one's a really nice fit for you because I think that this coffee is nicely done for the profile that it's in. It's just not necessarily my type of coffee in general. So people that do like the more kind of lasting cups of coffee without that really strong acidity, I feel like that this one would be a pretty nice fit for you. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Benjamin Potts wash processed Honduras from Fuglen Coffee Roasters. Thank you for watching.